So Shark Week is celebrating all things shark?
I don't really know. I've never seen it, but I understand from the channels I pay attention to that this piece of video emerged on Shark Week and caused a certain amount of...
Okay, so I have not seen the video in question. You're going to have there's no sound being...
There's no sound, so we can talk right over it. And you don't really
okay.
need the sound. Now, what we have here is a shark.
That is a shark.
Yeah. And he's maneuvering around using his pectoral fins. And at one point here, he actually kind of goes over a little barrier.
That's not a shark.
No, that is not a shark. But anyway, we're about to get...
So we've got very shallow, presumably salt water here, like an intertidal zone almost, maybe.
Yeah.
With a shark.
Right.
Little leopard-spotted shark, cute little guy. Using, as Brett said, his pectoral fins to, propel himself over in very, very shallow water.
Now, can we agree?
And his gills are still underwater, right? Yeah.
Well, they're moist. I think the gills go out of water here briefly, and then he maneuvers into the next little pool. Now, the claim here is that this is the first time this has been seen.
Who said that? You said
the Discovery Channel, Shark Week. Did I mention that?
Yeah, Shark Week.
Yeah.
It said the first time it's been seen.
Yeah.
Not by other sharks, presumably.
Well, that's the question I wanted to raise.
This is like Cristobal Colon discovering America.
Right.
It's the first time sharks have done this. No.
So, right. Cristobal Colon, who discovered a pair of continents with something like 50 million people living very well there.
Right. Sharks have presumably been trying this out.
Did I ever tell you about the time I discovered Manhattan?
How much did you pay for it?
Too much, and I didn't even get to keep it. But
yeah. I mean... Is it possible that some videographer witnessed the very first time that a shark? No. I mean, it's possible, but very unlikely.
But even the claim that this is the first time it's been observed, I find very unlikely for reasons I want to briefly explore.
Okay. So, observed by people is the idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
In evolutionary biology, we sometimes use the metaphor of the adaptive landscape, in which opportunities are pictured as peaks and obstacles of moving from one opportunity to the next are valleys. Now, the reason that this is useful as a metaphor is that it highlights certain counterintuitive things about what actually drives and impedes evolution, or adaptive evolution at least, which is to say, the depth of a valley dictates the likelihood of a creature evolving from one opportunity to a better opportunity, not the difference in height between the two opportunities. There can be some very good way of being that's pretty near where you are, but if the evolutionary obstacle to getting there is particularly deep, you're unlikely to jump that gap. Now, the opposite is also true. We don't talk about this as much. But opportunities where there is no gap, where what there is a gentle slope, where if you evolve in this direction, things just simply start getting better and keep getting better for some long period, those are almost certain to be crossed. Mm-hmm. And so my point would be, this exact adaptation is known from, I've got at least 4 examples in mind, different clades that have done it, right? We've got coelacanths, we got lungfish, we got mud skippers, and now I've forgotten my 4th.
Coelacanths and lungfish could plausibly be the same event, given that they are they're both near the base of the Sarcopterygian tree, and we tetrapods are the other big group. And since we're out of water, who knows? It's possible that sort of at the base of the the lobe-fin fish tree, you had this ability, and both lungfish and coelacanths inherited that ability from their most recent common ancestor?
Possible, I think, and it's been many years since I looked at it, but I think it's more likely to be a parallelism where those two clades both had the characteristics that made this likely to evolve.
Yeah, and it's been a while since I've taught vertebrate evolution, so I haven't looked, but as I remember it, these sort of, coelacanths, lungfish, tetrapods group, the resolution between those 3 clades isn't totally clear. I don't think we know for sure who's most basal within that group.
It's a scaly question at the very least. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry. But anyway, the point is...
So wait, you had mud skippers, coelacanths, lungfish. You have another one?
I've forgotten what it is. I had one.
Okay, so mud skippers being actinops, ray-finned fish.
Yep.
Solidly within basically name a fish, it's probably an actinopterygian.
Okay.
Sharks aren't, coelacanths aren't, lungfish aren't, but almost every sturgeon are actinopterygians, but not teleosts. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. But point is, look, there are lots of circumstances in which something that we would call a fish by common parlance, faces a situation in which either it's trapped with a danger that it could survive if it can get out of the body of water that has the danger and into a body of water that doesn't, or more often there's some opportunity. There's a puddle that contains prey over there, but I'm over here, and there's a little bit of somewhat dry land between here and there, and if I could only just, wiggle my way across that piece of land. There are lots and lots of circumstances in which it's useful to be able to do a little bit of locomotion on land, and
they happen to be armed with pectoral fins.
Terrible. No, pretty good actually. But anyway, lots of circumstances in which it would be useful to be able to do that. The mode of locomotion actually leads directly to this discovery. Yeah. In other words, the wiggling motion of a fish in swimming also puts the pectoral fins, alternately on the substrate. And so my point is, this is one of these things that is probably unknown because we haven't looked for it, not because it's uncommon.
Yes.
And there's another one of these that's really...
They're not just going to lay there and die. They're going to do everything they can to get out of a situation if suddenly they find themselves in shallow water.
Right. It's bound to have
been... They've got lateral undulation, and they've got pectoral fins, and, put them together and do what you can.
Right. And the number of individuals who were birthed to some creature who succeeded at this and therefore didn't starve is liable to be large. And so the question really is, A, how common is this behavior in clades where we haven't seen it? My guess is it's a lot more common than we think.
Yeah.
B,
any kind of fish, probably not like a deep body form fish, but any kind of fish that tends to be in intertidal zones, with tide pools that sometimes will dry up more than they were expecting.
Yeah, tide pools that dry up, or tide pools where an unusual tide will make a puddle wet and an animal will get trapped and it has to get out because that pool isn't going to be wet again for another month or something.
Yeah. And just so deep body form just refers to sort of like an angelfish. Imagine an angelfish or a sunfish, one of these fish that's basically like a disc on the side where, no matter how hard they try to use their pectoral fins tend to be up on the body, so they probably wouldn't even reach, but they'd also just tip over.
Yeah.
So you need to have a somewhat flattened form for this to work.
Yep. Yeah. But anyway, the number of circumstances is huge. It's not likely to happen for anything in deep bodies of water. But there are a lot of animals that have a niche that puts them in proximity with idiosyncratic shorelines, that, the other. Bound to be somewhat common. And also highly likely, this is one of these questions where if you were to survey the indigenous people of all of the coastlines of the world, my guess is you'd come up with a bunch of them that had seen this behavior.
Of course sharks do that.
Right. Of course sharks do that.
Yeah.
And that this is new to science, which I don't even know if it is new to science, but if it's new to science, it's really cool. If it's not new to science, it's still really cool.
Well, I mean, one of the things you're saying, maybe the least interesting one, but if it's not new to science, Discovery Channel will hear about it. If it's not new to humanity, but it is new to science, the claim stands.
Right.
And this is the kind of thing that the DEI folks claim to be caring about, right? Like, don't imagine that you, with your wonderful wizarding scientific ways, can come in and see things that actually other people have been observing for a while and claim it as your own. Well, okay. Let's imagine that if, given what this particular thing is, it almost certainly has been seen by other human beings. But that doesn't mean that those other human beings inherently had the I used the term wizarding, but the scientific abilities to consider what it means or under what circumstances it would evolve or when it might happen. When it might happen, they might have the skills to have deduced that if it had practical application for them.
Yep.
If the sharks are good eating and there's a way to predict when they might go kind of pseudo-terrestrial and thus get them to go into something where they'll be easier to catch, well, you can be pretty sure that where those sharks exist, there are going to be people who have a good sense of how it is that they locomote over land when they do.
Yep. And I must tell you, in this case, had we been somewhere in the field and observed this, I would definitely have thought it was hugely cool, and I would remember it for the rest of my life.
Absolutely.
And I would have certainly discussed it. I don't know that I would have even thought that what I was looking at was new to science and therefore needed a report. And, there's a mechanism. It gets done, I think, less these days, but there used to be natural history notes where important features of behavior that had never been observed before, never been recorded in scientific literature before, could be reported without you needing to have a data justification. It's just, I saw this animal do that thing, which says
I
that
published
happens.
one of these about my frogs. It was like some little piece of observed predation, right?
Yep.
Attempted predation on these poison frogs in Madagascar, where like, okay, enough people are just interested, but also enough people are thinking about both the boas and the zonosaurs, which are these lizards, and these frogs and the toxins in the frogs. There's a lot of ways in that you might really want to know if anyone has ever observed either successful or attempted predation on these frogs. And, I happen to see two, and I don't know the fate of the zonosaur, and I do know the fate of the boa, which is that the boa took this frog into its mouth, gently chewed on it for 10 minutes, finally released the frog. Frog went on to be fine, went on to become a mother who fed her kids, and the boa moved dens shortly thereafter, and I think was fine, although I'm not actually totally sure because I didn't see it after a couple of weeks. But anyway, natural history notes where there's no pretense
experiment
of hypothesis or experiment or rigorous data collection. It's, hey, I was in the field and I saw this, and this is interesting. Maybe it's just interesting, but it might also be useful to other people.
Well, I mean, I think there is a way in which it fits exactly the falsificationist ethos of science in the following sense. Anything that you have seen happen once happens.
Absolutely.
And so if we assume that the hypothesis is that behavior does not exist until evidence accumulates that it does, how much evidence do you need? One honest report of having seen it is enough to say that it is at least within the realm of things that happen.
That's exactly right. And also, there's always a problem for animal behaviorists in that in order to do careful, rigorous work, we need to, spend hundreds, thousands of hours in the field taking careful notes by, whatever means that we have established in advance. But the really coolest stuff may still be out of our view. The more socially complex the organisms are that we're watching, the more likely they're going to hide from us and not, do the interesting stuff where we can see it. And it's also just very likely to be rare. And so one event you cannot run statistics on, but it still is worthy of discussion and of publication and of figuring out what else must be true if that thing happens. If, for instance, what she called, I think aptly, war that Jane Goodall observed between the two troops of chimps at Gombe, which there's objection to the term, but never again did she see anything exactly like that. And thank God that she wasn't like, well, I can't report that because I just saw it once. Like, no, you report when the chimps engage in war. You totally report that.
That's a great example. I would point out, actually, there's one of these for me where I have not published a note, but probably should have. When I was working on tent-making bats, there was a survey article that compiled, a review article that compiled all of the information on tent-making bats, and it had useful tables in it where it took all of the species, or 16 species that are known to engage in the behavior, and described what sorts of plants they used and the architectures and all. But the problem is, I became quickly convinced that the species that was most commonly observed to be a tent maker never makes tents at all, that it's a tent thief.
Is this AJ?
Yeah, Artibius chimesensis. And the thing that first clued me into that was it was the only one that used all of the architectures that were known from that location, right? But so you have to understand, nobody had seen a bat make a tent. So the inference that they make
You
tents...
were the first person ever to either see... Yeah, well, and in this case, you So, I mean, how are we not in a little bit of the same situation? Are you certain? How certain are you that no native peoples had ever observed a bat make a tent?
Pretty sure.
It's a lot more subtle and cryptic.
Here's the reason
for a number of reasons than
here's the reason
sharks
I think
going
I know
over
it.
land. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's also a technical reason.
Okay.
Bats are very shy about making tents,
Yeah.
so they kind of don't do it when you're standing there.
Yeah.
They do it under cover of darkness.
Yeah.
And
under cover of the leaves that they are modifying to make into the tents.
Right. So the point is these are happening low in the understory of a forest that absorbs 99% of the light that hits it before it gets to the floor. So a dark floor in the night, and they are very sensitive about people.
Yep.
So what I was able to do to observe this was I knew enough about the tents and the behavior to spot one that had just begun. Mm-hmm. And I set up infrared. This was before infrared cameras were, the cameras were available, but there wasn't night shot on video cameras that you could buy. So I made an illuminator out of LEDs from basically remote controls for TVs. Built them into a lucite block.
Bat-Bright 150.
No, it was the Bat-Bright 4000.
I knew 150 was low.
I kept making ones that didn't have enough power, and I kept increasing the power. The Bat-Bright 4000 is the one that really revolutionized the industry, me being the industry. But anyway, I built this thing, and it was powered off of 12-volt batteries, which I hauled into the forest and hauled out during the day and charged them. And I set up these infrared cameras, basically just bank surveillance cameras, which are sensitive in the infrared. And I was able to put that under the leaf that was being modified, and I could sit 50 meters away where I wasn't disturbing the animal and just quietly sit there and watch the thing happen. So the point is, the conditions if I hadn't had the tech, I wouldn't have been able to see anything. Mm-hmm. If I'd stood there with a light, it wouldn't work. If I'd stood there at all, it probably would have dissuaded the animal from building. So in that case, probably. On the other hand, some of the species do build these things in urban areas. So it's possible that, in a village somewhere, bats building in a palm high up and above the ground who might not have been as disturbed could have done it. But anyway, to go back to the Artibius thing.
Before you continue, so AJ, Artibius gemmicensis, is described with particularly sort of juicy detail.
Bites ferociously when handled.
Yes.
Which it does.
Yes.
It's a very aggressive...
Sort of the field notes for how to identify what bat are you holding? Bites ferociously when handled. That'll be the one then.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's larger than the other tent makers.
Which is still body size is still very small. Wingspan.
Yeah, wingspan would be 6-8 inches.
Yeah.
But so it's like the size of a fist, the animal's body. It's a pretty large animal, and it's much. So the thing is, the tent makers are all small. This one's conspicuously large, and it doesn't stick with a tent style. All of which made me
trans tent makers.
Well, it made me suspect something was not right about this bat, and then I started to test that hypothesis by looking at the data that other people had taken on tents. And the point was, there was no case in which this animal had ever built a tent, had ever been observed to inhabit a tent that was not also the species of plant and the architecture of tent built by some other animal in the same location.
That was sympatric. Yep.
Right. Yep. So that is strongly suggestive evidence. Then the natural history observation is the observation that a tent that I knew was inhabited by another species was taken over by Artibius gemmicensis, proving it's a thief. Mm-hmm. Right? So the point is, that kind of information tells
it doesn't prove it's only a thief, but the circumstantial plus that suggests that, and the fact that he doesn't look like any other tent makers.
Right. So all of those things combined. But the point is, the one thing there that is more than just suggestive is the fact that it is known, at least in one case, to inhabit tents that were previously inhabited by a different species. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's worthy of a note, because it means that anybody later on studying these animals can at least say, well, I'm starting from the knowledge that sometimes Artibius gemmicensis does take over a tent from another species. Yeah, no, it's a first step. It's a foundation on which another research program could be built, and it's worthy of being shared. This is what
the scientific record is supposed to be doing for us. And instead, it's increasingly being filled with garbagey claims about people wanting an alienating work environment, as evidenced by those who are making those claims actually creating an alienating environment for everyone.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And feeling good about themselves for doing so.
No, I don't know. We can't. Maybe. Or just feeling like they're secure in their jobs now that they have stood up for the currently fashionable thing. And that's not what scientists are supposed to be doing. They're not supposed to be standing up for the currently fashionable thing.